Do you ever get so engrossed in a game that you just get overwhelmed by this feeling? It might be hard to describe exactly what it is, but it's there, and you recognize it. And for as long as you're playing that game, that feeling remains. Maybe that sounds weird, but that's how survival horror games almost always make me feel. More so than any other genre of games, survival horror, to me, is special for its atmosphere. So in this video I want to talk about a lot of different survival horror games and series that I've played or been into or known about for years, and some of which I've only tried sort of recently, and just give you my thoughts on them. The first time I ever saw a game like this was sometime in the early to mid 2000s. My friend was going to set up his PlayStation 1. He was going to show me and my sister a game he had. While he was setting it up, I went to another room to get something to drink, and when I came back, this is what I saw.
Resident Evil.
It completely blew my tiny fucking child brain. I was maybe 8 at the time, and the scariest thing I'd ever experienced in a game at that point was Bowser's laugh in Mario 64. I thought it was so scary as a kid. Anyways, I watched as he started the game, and after a cutscene we were thrown straight into the gameplay. The music and visuals of this game have forever been burned into my brain. We ended up borrowing it to play on our PS2 at home. Well, my sister played it, I was too scared. And admittedly, we didn't get far. Just quit after we died once because we got scared. Pretty soon though, we wanted these games for ourselves. The first one we got was Resident Evil 4. While I don't feel like the atmosphere of RE4 has the same effect on me as other games I'm going to talk about, I still adore this game. This is a really fun, cheesy, weird, silly, but also spooky type of mix between action and survival horror. It's not my favorite Resident Evil, but it is the first I beat, because outside of the regenerators, it just wasn't that scary to me as a kid. So it ended up serving as a very good entry point for this genre. Eventually I started playing Resident Evil 1. I love exploring the mansion. It's really iconic, and for a good reason. Slowly uncovering the fucked up stuff that happened here, while doing your best to keep yourself and your fellow STARS members alive, made for a really great experience. There are so many unique locations in this game. Considering it mostly takes place in one mansion, they really got creative with the sections outside of it. All the locations were memorable, and of course you can't forget the save themes of the older Resident Evil games. They are wonderful. For a moment you can relax and be happy that your progress is saved. Oh, and if you didn't know, Resident Evil games used to have a limited amount of saves. You'd need ink ribbons to write on the typewriter to save, meaning you can't save too much or else you might get stuck. I never had that happen to me though, but it does make situations a lot scarier when you know you might lose a lot of progress, and I kinda missed that. Of course I had to move on to play Resident Evil 2. It's a fan favorite for a good reason, and it really improved upon the first game. There was something so enjoyable about exploring all these streets that were once bustling with people, and now it's all quiet and in shambles. Running around trying to find my way in Raccoon City while escaping from all the new entities trying to kill you, saving Sherry or meeting Ada, trying to escape the town together before it all comes crumbling down, figuring out the story behind the Birkin family and the G-Virus, and the weird backstory behind the chief of police was great. And I love seeing Leon and Claire trying to get through the shit together. And I feel like Raccoon City Police Department is such a fun place to explore. That main hall theme is so nostalgic to me. But of course, that's not the only story that takes place in Raccoon City. In Resident Evil 3, you play Jill from the first game and you have to escape Nemesis, who's always chasing you. Sometimes you'll get forks in the road where you have to make a choice quickly. He can just appear at any moment and it's super scary and fun. It makes you always feel like you're being hunted down. Thankfully, he usually doesn't appear in areas where there's puzzles and stuff to do. He's never annoying, at least not to me. The different areas have different atmospheres, and the music really makes that pull through. And as for the remakes, while Resident Evil 1 got a pretty direct remake where everything was just upgraded and straight up made better, the remake of Resident Evil 2 took a pretty different approach, but in my opinion I feel like it worked really well, because it took everything it needed to from the original game and just improved it, modernized it. There is one thing the original game did better though. The A and B scenario system where you play as one character and then another is a bit mishandled in the remake because you have to redo certain bosses and puzzles. But that's really the only complaint I have. I felt like the remake was also a bit more emotional in a way. The zombies in this game are the best I've ever seen. All the different ways they react to when you shoot them, the way their limbs can just slowly fall off, Even if you remove all of their limbs but one, they will still use that one limb to try to get you. This one zombie is missing one arm and one leg, and she's still using the other arm and the other leg in a way that looks organic. It's really creepy and weird. I can't imagine the effort it took to make the zombies work this well. You can even separate the torso from the legs and it'll just crawl around. The damage looks so organic and brutal. You even have to push zombie corpses off of you if they die right in front of you. I've never seen that before in a game. RE2 Remake is also an amazingly good looking game. Walking through the burning hellscape that is the Raccoon City outbreak feels so well realized. But I'm so glad you can choose the old soundtrack, because the new soundtrack is mostly just silent, which is fair. That is one way to build an atmosphere. It's a very legitimate way to do a horror atmosphere. But I need that classic Resident Evil music in these areas, otherwise it just doesn't feel the same to me. So I'm so thankful that the old OST is an option. But you can't swap the OST in Resident Evil 3 Remake. I thought Resident Evil 3's remake was really disappointing, because Nemesis stopped being a random threat and became this like mostly cutscene oriented, hallway chasing, boss fight only type thing. He only chases you the way he did in the original game for like 15 minutes maybe. They also removed the branching paths, and a lot of my favorite locations like the clock tower and the park were just completely removed. And also there's almost no puzzles in this game, and yeah, I gotta say it, man, I fucking love the puzzles in Resident Evil games. I don't know why, I just like them, but this game pretty much has like 1 or 2 puzzles and that's it. And compared to Resident Evil 2 Remake, it doesn't even have any good side content. I'm sorry, I had to rant about it. It's a good game, it is a good action horror game, but I don't think it's a very good survival horror game. I don't think it really captures what the original Resident Evil 3 was all about, which was the Nemesis. Anyways, I've got to talk about one of my favorite Resident Evil games, Resident Evil Code Veronica. I don't think it gets as much attention as it deserves. I also adore playing Code Veronica for its setting with the prison, the graveyard, as well as the weird Ashford house. This game might have my favorite save theme of all time. And of course, Steve is an adorable fucking idiot. This game is definitely the most cheesy one so far, but I fucking love it. The Ashfords are some of the most interesting villains in the Resident Evil universe. Their whole family is so weird, and the more you learn about them, the creepier it gets. And I adore the gothic vibe some of these locations have. Honestly, this game is fantastic. And after this, I played 5, which is a fun, more action-y take. It's not really a Resident Evil game in my mind, but it is good. 6, not so much. Neither of these games have much of an atmosphere to talk about. They just sort of feel like a weird, dumb action thing with like zombie elements. Anyways, when it comes to Resident Evil, the atmosphere is wonderful. The story and characters can be a bit cheesy, but it's serious enough to keep me engaged. I feel like it strikes a nice balance, and it has a certain mood that no other franchise has in my eyes. I'm glad to see that it's still going strong and making great games to this day. It's a series that means a lot to me, but I've gushed enough about it for now. There is more series in this genre that I want to talk about. One of which is Fatal Frame, also known as Project Zero, also known as just Zero in Japan. I don't know why they gave it a different name for each region. It makes it kind of awkward for people who are fans of it to talk about it. Most people just call it Fatal Frame, which is a pretty badass title. I really like the concept of taking photos of the ghosts you're fighting. It makes it intense because you're forced to look right at the ghost that's attacking you. It's really satisfying to take them down. These games don't use their soundtrack as much as Resident Evil, but it's going for a much more quiet and ambient atmosphere. The game relies a lot more on its great sound design. Walking through quiet and dark hallways and hearing faint moanings of ghosts. I feel like the horror in these games are very effective, at least to me. I also enjoy the setting of these games, because they all take place in small Japanese towns that are like in the middle of nowhere and generally pretty old. Most of the survival horror games I've played have more western settings, so it's a nice change of pace. The plots all revolve around these crazy old Japanese rituals like some occult shit, and I really love that. I remember watching playthroughs of these games back in the early YouTube days, and I thought it was the scariest shit ever. So I have some good memories with these games. I recommend these games if you're interested, at least the first 3. They're a very unique experience, that's for sure. But keep in mind, some of the English voice acting is a bit shit, but I kinda think that makes the game more enjoyable because it's just so goofy. The PS2 is home to many survival horror franchises, and a lot of them are pretty unknown. Games such as Rule of Rose, Haunting Ground. I have a friend who owns those games, so I've tried both of them, but I haven't gotten super far in either. Sadly though, these games are extremely rare, but they are good. They have really interesting stories. From Software, the creators of Dark Souls, also used to make a lot of survival horror games back in the day, such as their Echo Knight franchise and Kuon, which I also played at that same friend's place. It's cool to see a survival horror game set in an old Japan. This game takes place in the Heian period. It makes it a very unique experience. I also want to talk a little bit about one of the first games of its kind, Clock Tower. This game was released in 1995 on the Super Famicom, which is the Japanese Super Nintendo. It was only released in Japan. There is a fan-translated version out there though, which is how I played it. This game is kind of like a point-and-click survival horror game where you gotta guide a girl named Jennifer around the Barrows family mansion. It takes place in my home country of Norway too, which is pretty cool. I can't think of any other horror games that do. I really enjoy the music, and walking around in the mansion is just really scary. I mean, this game really freaks me out at times. The pixel art is also really fantastic. Some of these shots and scenes look amazing. You can tell there's a lot of effort being put into this game, and the way it looks. It's really impressive for a Super Nintendo game, but I do have some complaints. This game loves to fuck with you, and a lot of the deaths are by trial and error. Like if you let this parrot out, he just kills you, unless you know to cover it up with this blanket. I also feel like figuring out how to survive isn't always super clear, which can make situations tense, but it feels a bit frustrating at times. I feel like I never really know what to do. But at the end of the day, this game is a classic, and it spawned a whole franchise that sadly has been dead since the PS2. There was a spiritual successor that got funded through Kickstarter, which I backed, but when I finally got to play it, I just got lost and gave up. It just didn't interest me. But that's enough about those games, because there's still one franchise that might have the most unique and special atmosphere of any survival horror series.
In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place, waiting for you.
I don't even know how I should begin to describe the dense atmosphere of Silent Hill. I don't want to make it sound like they're flawless. The gameplay isn't the most impressive or challenging, and there are definitely some sections that I find to be more annoying or confusing first time playing them. But even though the gameplay isn't the best, it doesn't have to be. Like in my mind, Resident Evil was always about the gameplay and the challenge and working with all the limited resources, while Silent Hill does have some of that, but it's more about the atmosphere and the story and the pure fucking depression just like injected into my veins. It's a strange series that's been sadly mishandled so badly by Konami until it just faded into nothingness. But ignoring all that, let's move on to the achievements of the Silent Hill franchise. The town of Silent Hill feels like it has a personality of its own. It's a foggy, quiet town with a mysterious backstory. I'd say it's almost Lovecraftian in how bizarre it is. Each game I feel like you get to see a different piece of the puzzle, and as you're exploring various houses, hotels, and restaurants and the empty abandoned streets, you're almost always completely alone. But the further you push to find what you came there for, the darker it gets. Monsters are twisted with few human features, and the world slowly shifts into a dark, bloody, rusty reflection of itself as you dive into a world of madness. Playing these games feel like experiencing some weird dream that you just want to know more about. There's something to be said about the way you wander through these completely deserted streets just wondering what the hell happened here, and you can barely see anywhere because of the fog, and the snow is just gently falling down as you keep exploring the streets and paying attention to your radio, which lets you know if there's a threat nearby. Silent Hill lets its ambience do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to its atmosphere. It has some really excellent sound design, but my favorite moments are when the music kicks in. The atmosphere of these games just really takes me back. I still remember when I first played these games and a lot of the things I thought and felt at the time. These games really stuck with me. It just has this strong feeling that no other game series I can think of has. Like in my mind, a lot of series just have a certain feeling to them. But Silent Hill is in its own special little sphere. It's a game series that I love thinking about, I love talking about, and I love hearing people's theories about. Along the way, I'll encounter people that have all come here for different reasons, and those few times you meet actual human beings feel like a breath of fresh air. Well, most of the time. You don't always know who's truly good or bad, or who you can or can't trust. You just have to keep moving until you reach the end. The acting in these games is definitely very strange, even really cheesy at times, but some of the acting is really phenomenal. There's something really intentional about all the weirdness when it comes to the acting. It feels like it fits the tone so well, and while other times it's just genuinely really good. Out of all of them, Silent Hill 2 will always be the most special to me. Maybe it's because it's the first one I played, but it could also be because it really took the concept to another level, playing with the implications of what this town actually is and what it does to people. I have to mention the incredibly twisted visual designs as well, all of which seem to have a lot of thought put into them. You can watch theories for hours on end about what everything in Silent Hill really means. There's so much at play here, and they take inspiration from a lot of different places. It really helps sell this supernatural and bizarre world. While they might not be the scariest games of all time, there's so much passion in these games that I can just feel when I'm playing them. I can't get enough of that soundtrack by Akira Yamaoka. It is just unbelievable. It does so much for the atmosphere of the games, and I can't imagine this franchise without it. I mean, I have a playlist on my Spotify that's just Silent Hill and Resident Evil music. I love playing my survival horror playlist and just walking around town at night. I live in a small town at the moment, and there's something so nice about the atmosphere when it's dark outside and all the lights are on, looking at trees gently blowing in the wind while I'm just wandering outside all by myself. Something about those moments make me think about how much I love and adore these survival horror games. I feel like I could just drown in the atmosphere, there's so much of it. And even though a lot of the games include a lot of backtracking and wandering through the same areas, I don't mind it, because every moment when I'm playing those games, I have that feeling, you know? That survival horror feeling. Thanks for watching the video. I want to know your thoughts, like what are some of your favorite survival horror games? Have you played any? And is there any game with an atmosphere that you just really enjoy and you become super engrossed in? I'd love to know. And I do recommend most of the games that I've talked about today, and if you have any survival horror recommendations for me, then I mean, I'll take them.